All right. So let's get started with our webinar today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Crimson Baraka. I am the Forensic Interview Program Supervisor here at Baltimore Child Abuse Center. I wanted to say that myself and my team have really worked hard to help those of you across the country in setting up and learning about teleforensic interviewing. However, we are not necessarily the experts on this topic. We are just like you. We are learning and trying to figure out how best to embark on this very strange state of affairs we have in our world right now with the pandemic. So we welcome your suggestions. We're gonna offer a survey to you all at the end so that we can learn about your experiences, which are really important. So I am going to have our other panelists introduce themselves. I have one panelist joining us later because she's finishing up another peer review. But those of us who are on the panel now, I'll start with Sammy Jo.
Hi, I was just answering a question. Real quick, Crimson, apparently people have registered, but Zoom indicated they have 100 participants maximum. So are we going to record or we'll have another date? You're muted. Crim, you're muted.
Sorry about that technical issue, guys. I see we have more than 100 participants, so I'm not sure why Zoom is blocking it. But please be assured we will be broadcasting this webinar on our website.
All right. So I'm Sammy Jo Kanakuni. I'm the lead forensic interviewer at Baltimore Child Abuse Center. And I will be here hopefully answering questions and playing some video examples of teleforensic interviews that we worked on.
Jason, you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Dickinson. I'm sure that I've met some of you before. I'm a professor of psychology at Montclair State University, and Nicole Lytle and I have a research lab at Montclair State that studies children's eyewitness testimony. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jason. And Nicole.
Hi, as Jason said, I'm an assistant professor at Montclair State, and we are joining to talk a little bit about research.
And Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon Wood. I'm one of the forensic interviewers at Baltimore Child Abuse Center.
All right, great. So Jason and Nicole, if you would start out with telling folks about the research. I know it's not published yet, but research that you have been working on this topic.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about a research study that we've been doing. Some of you have probably heard about it previously if you've been in the previous webinars, and then I'm going to let Nicole talk about some of the practical matters that go along with teleforensic interviewing that we've seen in the laboratory, because we've interviewed a couple of hundred children this way. Obviously not in a pandemic situation, but we've learned a few things in the lab, and Nicole will share those with you. The research is important because before investigative or interviewing practices become widespread, it's critically important that there's some level of research to make sure that those practices are safe and effective, which gives forensic interviewers and CACs legal cover for the types of things that they engage in. So one thing that we do in the laboratory is we conduct research, and oftentimes our findings are translated into best practices and techniques that you all use on the front lines. So we did this study on remote forensic interviewing, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. We started it a few years ago, And even though people weren't really doing teleforensic interviewing, we were kind of looking into the future and saw that this is something that people will eventually start doing. Of course, we didn't imagine that, like everybody else, we didn't really imagine we'd be talking about a pandemic. But we did the research because teleforensic interviewing has the potential to aid investigations of child maltreatment when witnesses and interviewers are separated either by vast distances or when interviews would benefit from specialized expertise that is not readily available. But it's currently unknown, or it was currently unknown, if remote interviewing was a safe and effective alternative to face-to-face interviewing, particularly for those children aged across the developmental span that is most prone to suggestibility and struggles with the use of interviewing aids to communicate personally experienced events. So to explore this question, we did this study, Nicole and I, and also Deb Poole of Central Michigan University. And there were 261 children in the study, ages 4 to 8 years old, and they participated in an event with a male assistant that involved bodily touch. So this was one of our Mr. Science germ detective paradigms. For those of you who follow the research, that will be familiar to you. But it's a well-established paradigm that works very well with children of this age. So after subsequent exposure to true and false information from parents, interviewers questioned children about the events using a face-to-face or remote interviewing format. And there was a 2-week delay between the event and the forensic interview. We found no significant differences between conditions and the number of accurate or inaccurate touch reports. But in the face-to-face condition, 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds were more talkative, and 4- and 5-year-olds were more likely to disclose in the early substantive interview phases. So these results overall suggest that remote forensic interviewing is a legally defensible alternative to face-to-face interviewing, particularly when case features pose challenges like we see in the current pandemic. Despite finding no differences in reports of experience and suggested touching between conditions, the findings do highlight the need to better understand age differences in how children respond to remote interviewing, and also how interviewer behavior in remote interviews may impact the quality of children's testimony. So the take-home message really is that the use of teleforensic interviewing does not substantively or significantly change the quality of children's testimony. So again, one of the key takeaways was that we found no increase or decrease in true or false reports of touching, which is the key dependent variable that we looked at in the study. So what the study really does is it provides legal cover for using teleforensic interviews. So if anyone claims that teleforensic interviews are inherently suggestive because children are talking through a screen, because they may use that or associate a screen with imagination or television or things like that, or maybe they're not engaged in a screen and they're not paying attention, our results really rebuff those claims. That said, you still need to follow best interviewing practices. It doesn't, the study just looked at teleforensic interviewing as a practice in and of itself. Obviously, suggestive questions can still be delivered in a teleforensic interview, and that's not legally defensible. But overall, our results kind of paved the way for this emerging practice. There's obviously a lot of considerations that need to be worked out, which is one reason that we're meeting today. The study results are not published yet. We are almost finished with the manuscript and we'll be submitting it for review. So hopefully in a couple of months. But suffice it to say, the results are promising, and we're confident enough in our findings to discuss them here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who can talk a little bit more about our experiences in the lab.
Thanks. So in terms of implementing the tele-interview in the lab setting, our main kind of difference in terms of the protocol from a face-to-face that we delivered in the lab was how we introduced the space to the children, and also some of the ground rules. So we obviously needed to describe to the children why they were going to be talking through a computer versus with someone in the room. So we have outlined kind of that introduction process, but also some of the additional ground rules that we added in a document that you can find on NCA's website, but also Crimson said that she would be posting that on.
Sorry guys, we lost Nicole. Hopefully she'll be able to get back on.
Would freeze or get stuck. Can you hear me?
Yep. You froze just a minute ago, but you look good now.
Ironically, I was talking about a ground rule, explaining that sometimes the computer would freeze, or it might freeze, it might get stuck. So we made sure that the children knew ahead of time that there might be some problems with technology. And we delivered that in as age-appropriate language as we could. So you can take a look at our language and see how we framed kind of some of those additional ground rules around possible problems with technology. And certainly you'll need to adjust that based on the scenario in the way in which you're going to deliver a tele-forensic interview. So in our setting, we actually had an assistant in the room with the child to help troubleshoot if we had problems. Depending on whether or not you can have someone sitting in the room with the child, you know, law enforcement or somebody who is able to be there, you may not have an assistant. And so you'll need to think through how you will help the child to navigate any of the technology problems that could arise on their side. That being said, children are really pretty tolerant of any of the technological problems that came up in the lab setting. So the main issues we ran into was that sometimes our internet connection wasn't great. It was hard to hear sometimes, either because of lag or because of our audio quality, and we would need to spend some time working with that. Most of the children were pretty patient when we were doing that. Because you might run into some audio problems, we would recommend that you have a backup audio recorder. We assume, you know, that if you're recording, you're going to screen capture on the interviewer side, but it's possible that if you do have a break in your connection, that the child will say something. And so a backup audio recorder on the child's side is really helpful to capture anything that is said when perhaps your screen capture either, you know, the connection broke, or the child was talking quietly and didn't quite capture exactly what the child said. Another challenge that I think might come up that we saw in the lab was that occasionally we couldn't hear what the child said, and we needed them to repeat their answer. Or the child may not have heard our question, so we needed to repeat a question. Obviously, this can raise some concerns if you're repeating questions to a child. And so what we did was we made sure that if we did need to repeat something, either a question or have the child say their answer again, that we explicitly said, I can't hear you. I need you to say your answer again. Or I'm going to repeat my question so that you can hear. And this explicit request really makes sure it's clear to the child that you're asking them because you didn't hear them or they didn't hear you. So I think that could be helpful if you do find yourself needing to repeat a question or having the child repeat what they said. And then perhaps kind of the last thing we'll leave you with before we kind of move this back to Crimson is that slowing down in the interview helps regardless of format, whether you're meeting face-to-face or remote through a tele-forensic interview. Recently, Deb Poole and her team at Central Michigan published a paper on pausing, and she recommends that you pause 10 seconds after asking an open prompt. And essentially, they found that this additional wait time allowed children to share more information. Interviewers didn't cut children off. That allowed the child some more time to think, and that essentially a 10-second wait period after open prompts allowed the child to produce more information and share that. In a teleforensic interview, I think this recommendation is even more helpful because with the technology, there are sometimes lag between the interviewer's question and that delivery to the child. And so pausing in a teleforensic interview makes sure that that lag time doesn't cause you to cut off the child prematurely, even more than you would in a face-to-face interview. And I think, you know, there are certainly some other ideas on how you might think about potential behaviors with children. So I'll stick around and answer any questions if it's helpful from kind of the perspective of working with children in the lab setting through teleforensic interviews.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This is really useful information for all of us. And I'm hoping to illustrate some of the things you mentioned in a video example in just a little bit here. So I want everybody to, if you can, to take the poll. Let's see, I'm going to try to post the poll here. The poll is very simple, just asking if you've conducted a teleforensic interview. And we'll get back to that towards the end. So now I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a PowerPoint as I talk. So NCA, National Children's Alliance, has put out some guidelines for all of us about conducting teleforensic interviews during COVID-19. Really want to stress that the teleforensic interview technique that we've used and we're going to talk to you guys about today it's an alternative to use in emergency situations such as this, natural disasters or other problems that make it unsafe for an in-person interview to occur. However, we have developed, and with the help of the research that Jason and Nicole have worked on, this process is defensible, as Jason had mentioned. So that's really good for all of us to know. And when I say that it's defensible, again, there are protocols and things that we need to follow in order for that to be defensible. Teleforensic interviews in the home or when the child is in their home environment, there are lots and lots of concerns there. And in the NCA guidelines, this is really not recommended, not permissible in cases where it's intrafamilial abuse. And there are lots of cautions about doing forensic interviews when the child is in their home. So we today are going to primarily focus on how to conduct a forensic interview in your CAC environment. Let's see, I am going to show you a video of how we have set up in our CAC a tele-FI room that's set up for young children. I'm going to hold on for a second and turn up the volume here. Were you guys able to hear that okay?
We weren't able to hear on my end, at least. Crimson.
Okay. Yeah.
It may be easier to just pull up the video rather than playing it off the PowerPoint, if that doesn't work.
Let's try this.
Crimson Barak, I'm doing this video to show you our COVID-19 setup for forensic interviewing, or should I say teleforensic interviewing. This is our center. I'm going to take you to our interview rooms. We have 3 interview rooms. One of our rooms is set up as the interviewer room. So if you come around, you can see I have Zoom video set up. I can turn it on to record, and I am looking at the camera view of our other interview room. We've set it up for young children. So let me take you in there.
So as you can see, in our one interview room, here's the camera, and this is for our iRecord system. So we would be recording on the iRecord system, the room that the interviewer's in, as well as the Zoom interview itself.
So this interview room is set up so that the child can be in the room, and I have a camera set up here, and the camera has a view of the entire interview room. So it's set up for a young child. As you can see, the camera is out of reach for a young child. And
so this room set up here, again, this is our other interviewing room. So this is the iRecord camera that's recording the room, and this is the webcam. So this webcam has also got a view of the room that the interviewer can see. And this obviously is the screen, the monitor that will have the image of the interviewer communicating with the young child. In this room, there is no computer. So, you know, the child can't tamper with anything here. They can't turn off the power to the computer. The computer is actually wired into another, into our observation room, but you can do this any number of ways. You can also set it up so that you have the computer in the room with the child, but you use a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard so that you can take that out of the room so the child can't press any buttons on or mess with the conversation in that way. So this is another guide we've set up and have shared with folks to help them understand how we've set up this forensic interview room. I'm happy to go back to this, show an additional video at the end if there are questions. But essentially, we initially put this interview room together using Wi-Fi. And we found out the Wi-Fi in our center was too unstable to accommodate this type of interview. So we ended up wiring Ethernet to the various interview rooms that we have set up with monitors for the interviewer and for the child to communicate. The setup is such that we basically unplugged the Ethernet from a computer that was nearby to our forensic interview rooms. And then we ran that Ethernet cable into a router, which then was able to act as an extension to connect Ethernet to the interview rooms. This may be confusing for some of you, and the tech made my head hurt in trying to set this all up. Duct tape is very helpful. We should have added that to our list of supplies. But this is relatively simple to set up once you understand how it works. So this is one of the other rooms we have where this is a speaker, obviously the monitor and the webcam. This is set up in the interview room for our older kids. This is just showing you the various ways you can connect your aux cord to your computer for a speaker here. And these are the Ethernet wires we have running outside of our interview rooms. It's a mess, but you know, in times like these, you just have to be innovative and do what you can. This obviously, again, is a picture of the young child's interview room. This is the webcam we're using. This is a speaker. So, you know, sound is really, really important. You know, the sound that is broadcast through our PCs we had set up was not adequate. So we needed to bring in speakers so that the child could really hear the interviewer's words very clearly, and vice versa.
Graham, we have a question.
Yep.
From Heather. Hi, Heather. Would you recommend TFI at the CAC with interview and child in separate rooms versus both in the same room wearing masks?
You know, I personally feel like the TFI setup is nice because you can see each other and you are not masked. And I mean, if interviewers have access to PPE, you know, that's great, but I still think it's safer for the interviewer and for the child if they're not sitting in the same room for, you know, what could be a long period of time. Sometimes our interviews are an hour, depending, but that's a long time to be in the same room, especially most of us have fairly small interview rooms where it's difficult to maintain appropriate social distancing. I'm also going to share a decision tree that we came up with. All these documents I'm sharing with you, we will make available on a website for you guys to access later. But we've been doing MDT calls every day for new cases that come in. And, you know, right now at our CAC, we're only seeing emergent cases, cases where the abuse just happened, it's acute, or cases where there's you know, a safety issue that an interview is really important to resolve safety issues for that child. So as an MDT, we are deciding if an interview is needed. And if an interview is needed at this time, we want to know, does this child have symptoms? Have they been exposed? Obviously, every child and family member that comes in right now could potentially have, you know, be positive for COVID-19. We don't know that, but if they are not symptomatic or we know of exposure, we are bringing them in if it's an emergency case. If the case is intrafamilial, you know, we are not going to be doing any sort of TFI setup with the child in their home environment. We have not done that yet or needed to consider that with any case. Again, this is extremely, very much a last resort for us. And only under very certain conditions would we do that. Also, if that were ever the case, and we think it's really important that an investigator be present to make sure, you know, the child's environment is safe and there's no influences by others or eavesdropping in a home environment. However, the CAC setup is great. You know, the interviewer and the child can be in separate rooms. We do have PPE at our center. So we are having our interviewers wear N95 masks when the child arrives, when the family arrives, greeting them. But the interviewer can obviously take off their mask once they are in a room and shut the door, and the child's in their own room and shut the door. We are having families wear surgical masks as well when they come in. So in a pre-interview discussion with MDT, that's part of the decision tree I just talked about. You are obviously going to talk about exposure and symptoms, but in addition to that, you really want to know what the child's emotional state is, their psychological, if any risks there are in terms of any suicidality. And the child's age is really important, of course, as well, to determine what interview setup is going to be most conducive for this child. We are not doing any forensic interviews right now with children ages 3 or below. We do see 2-year-olds occasionally. So we are only seeing kids 4 and up at this time. We've only done tele-forensic interviewing with older children at this point. We'll show you an example of that. But prior to the child and the family coming into our CAC, if we decide that's important and necessary, we're going to conduct all pre-interview discussion with the family and preparation for the family's arrival. We're doing all of that remotely over the telephone. Prior to the child and family coming in, we are really only having our forensic interviewer contact the family Then the victim advocate or family advocate is involved immediately post forensic interview. But to reduce the number of people at our CAC and confusion potentially by the family talking to multiple people over the phone, we've decided to limit it in this way. So, very important to test the equipment before the child enters the room. Let the child know what the equipment is. Talk about the masks use, however that process is going to happen at your CACs. And then obviously a backup plan. What will happen if technology fails? We did have one forensic interview where the technology failed, where we were initially using Wi-Fi. In that case, we immediately set up a forensic interview in a conference room where the interviewer and the child could have more distance than we could provide in our interview rooms themselves. Now that we've resolved our tech issues, we won't need to do that with this setup. Introducing evidence. So this is obviously one of the biggest challenges for teleforensic interviewing. Introducing evidence is not ideal. It's really difficult to do so and not really recommended in terms of, you know, I've heard suggestions about sharing evidence via Zoom or an image of a body diagram via Zoom. This really is not recommended. There's no way to really document well what a child may be referring to. Obviously, there's lots of, it would be illegal to share any evidence if it was sexual abusive material. So I know this is a huge struggle for our federal or FBI and HSI forensic interviewers right now. You know, there are ways around the body diagram issue. I think a lot of us can use verbal ways to clarify with a child what body part they're referring to. You know, is there another name for that part, or what is that part used for? Some questions that we've used that have worked. Also, you know, if you really need to show evidence, and that is really important, perhaps in that case, if there's PPE available, you know, the interviewer could wear N95 mask, have that PPE on, the child put on a surgical mask, and the interviewer enter the room only for a brief period of time to show that evidence, and then return to the tele-FI setup. Now, this is an introduction we've used, and this is really borrowed from what Nicole had mentioned as ground rules. I'm not showing the entire ground rule here, but this is something we are using to help orient the child to the teleforensic interview setup. During the teleforensic interview, it's important to extend rapport building. You know, you really want the children to be as comfortable as possible. You know, we've done some of this, and my interviewers will share, you know, this is kind of awkward. You know, we're not used to a setup like this, especially for a forensic interview where children may be nervous or emotional. So you want to address these things and let the child know, you know, what to do throughout, and if something comes up, you know, when you're done, you know, you need to be very clear with the child. After the teleforensic interview is finished, one thing that we've been doing here is we only see one child for forensic interview per day. That's been our policy, that once the forensic interview is finished, the interviewer doesn't enter that room where the child has been in for, you know, the extended period of time, that the door is closed, and that, you know, any virus particles that may have been in the air, give it at least 2 to 3 hours for those particles to fall, and then the room is disinfected at that point. But since this is all a new process to us, we want to debrief with the child. ask them, how was that for you talking with me through a computer? We have a survey that we'd love for folks to fill out or submit as they're doing teleforensic interviews. I will share the link to the survey and show you guys this, but this isn't a survey that's gonna constitute research. Results are not going to be published from the survey that we're sharing with you all, but it'll better inform our training efforts here and a way to help each other out as we move forward. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and show you a video of a 5-year-old. Now this video is in preparation for this webinar and to help us get our feet wet in this process. We did mock interviews with a 5, 6, and 7-year-old. So Shannon is going to talk about this excerpt we took from a mock teleforensic interview with a 5-year-old. Again, these few children are not victims of abuse. They were volunteers graciously to show you what this could be like.
Okay, so this is the 5-year-old that you're about to see. The clip is some of his narrative practice, and I checked in just to see how he was feeling. And after I play the clip, I'll just speak a little bit more about my reaction during the interview, and then also watching the clip.
All right, I will be sharing. All right.
And when I ask a question,
Oh, 1 second, guys. Forgot that I'm on my AirPods. That won't work.
today, I want you to tell me.
We can hear it.
You can hear it? Okay, I can't hear it. Let me share again. All right.
And when I ask you a question today, I want you to tell me everything about it. From the beginning to the middle to the end, don't leave anything out. So we're gonna practice that. Tell me everything that you did this morning from the time you woke up until the time we started talking.
So when I woke up, I always start watching TV.
So what, you woke?
And then when I was watching TV, I also had some chips. And then I had, what did I have for breakfast? Oh yeah, a bagel. And then I got dressed and brushed my teeth. And after that, I think I watched the shows, and then I talked to you.
You watched a show and then you talked to me.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me all about your morning or your day so far. You helped me understand all the things that you were doing, even though I wasn't there. How do you feel so far, Lucas, about talking to me?
What?
How do you feel about talking to me?
I'm kind of nervous.
Kind of nervous?
Yeah.
Sometimes kids tell me that they feel nervous because it's the first time that we met. And as we start talking, they don't feel so nervous. So if you start to feel more nervous, you let me know, okay?
When I was watching TV, and then it was my turn to talk to you. I didn't really want to because I was like, I didn't get to finish my show.
Oh, you wanted to finish your show?
Yeah.
Tell me about the show.
But I just paused it.
You paused it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for pausing your show and talking to me today.
All right.
So I know I'm sort of squirmy and fidgety all the time. But you know, when I look at that video, I remember doing it, and I found it really hard for myself to sit still, especially when I was seeing myself on a screen. It's just one of the things that had not popped into my head that I would have to, deal with or think about until I was actually doing the practice interview. The other thing that I found difficult was that when he told me he was nervous, it was really hard to get a read of his emotions. Like, it was more, I was going straight, just on the words he was using, I was nervous. I thought I didn't really like not being able to read other body language. And then the other thing was sort of the pausing and waiting. And again, it could be lag, it could be his age, it could be both. It was very difficult. I think there were 2 times where I started to re-ask my question or interrupt him, and then he kept, continued speaking. So I thought that was really difficult. I got the hang of it as I, went through the interview, but it was just, I think if you can practice doing this in like a Zoom call, with kids that or just, like we set it up, it's really helpful because there's things that you're used to being able to assess in a one-on-one interview that you will no longer be able to assess or judge, and you'll even, notice things about yourself.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, I'm going to show you next a mock interview with a 6-year-old girl. And one thing I wanted to point out is we did try, at least in this next clip, it's very hard. Nicole mentioned the 10-second pause rule, which is awesome. I mean, the results from, letting kids continue to talk and not, saying anything or interrupting them, they will say more. And as much as I could hold in my next question, I was able to illustrate that with the 6-year-old that we're going to play next.
You want me to share that, Krim, or are you going to share it? I already have it up.
Yeah, why don't you do it? Thanks. Ellie, again, my name's Crimson, and we are talking through the computer right now. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Sorry?
Do you think that's pretty cool?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I just finished my lunch.
You just finished lunch? Oh, great. What did you have?
I had a grilled cheese, and when I finish this, I'm going to have some potato chips.
Ooh, that sounds great. Well, Ellie, have you ever talked to someone through a computer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How was that?
Good.
Yeah? Who do you talk to through the computer?
I talked to Miss Cindy.
Huh? Okay, great. So, talking on a computer is a lot like talking on the phone. But on the phone, we can only hear each other, but on the computer, we can see each other too. And
But we can also do FaceTime.
Yeah, have you done FaceTime before?
Uh-huh. I can only do it on the computer with Miss Cindy, though.
Oh, I gotcha. Who do you like to do FaceTime with?
My cousin and my grandparents.
Oh, great. Tell me about the last time you did FaceTime with your cousin and what happened.
She was about to do her praying.
Oh, okay. And then what happened?
She talked to me. I talked to her about my makeup.
Okay.
And then she had to go and pray. So she hanged up.
Okay, great. Well, I have a few questions that I want to ask you, but I can't be with you right now. And so this is how we're going to talk today, through the computer. Sound okay?
Yep.
Okay. So, we're talking through the computer today because of
Coronavirus.
Yeah. So, what do you know about coronavirus?
That it may kill some people.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, like, it does it on older people.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we don't visit we don't visit Gigi or anybody else.
Okay, I see.
So my mom's working from home, so that's why just my grandparents are taking care of me. They live across the street, like down the next block.
Ah. Anything else?
Have any more questions?
Yeah, so, well, how is life different right now for you because of
I can't play with my friends because my friend Alex, he's 4, and my friend Claire, it's Alex's brother, she's 3 or 2, and they both want to come near me, and so it's harder to play. And so that's why I don't play with them very hard.
Uh-huh. Tell me more about you saying that they want to play with you, and that's hard.
Because they really want to come near me.
Uh-huh. How else is your life different now because of coronavirus?
It's hard because I really want to visit California, but I can't.
Oh. Tell me more about that.
So, my friend, my mom's friend Jamie, and I really want to say hi, but we can't.
What else?
We post each other like videos, but I really want to see her for real life.
Tell me more about wanting to see her for real life.
Because I really want to see her children, and I really want to meet them so I have more friends.
Uh-huh.
So it's very hard to do it. And also it's hard because I lowered my sweets. It used to be 5 sweets per day, but now it's 4 sweets. So I have to, it's very hard because I don't want to get the coronavirus. So that's why we lowered my sweets.
Oh, gotcha. That's a good idea. Is that hard though?
Yeah, I really want 5 sweets again.
Yeah, tell me what's hard about only having 4 sweets instead of 5.
Because usually I like to do 4 sweets and then the 5th one is dessert. But sometimes 4, I get to, like, if I have a bigger, like, dessert, I can have 1 more dessert, but if I have 5, I can have 2 more desserts before bedtime.
I just love her.
She definitely could not be any cuter. I just want to say when I talked to this 6-year-old, You know, I didn't have that difficult of a time. I mean, she is quite the talker for 6. And you notice as I paused, even for long pauses, she would continue on to talk and then went into the whole issue about her sweets. Oh God, what a crisis she must be having about this. But, you know, she continued to talk, and I actually really liked that her face was so close to the camera. Like, I felt like she was really close. And I don't know, you know, how important that necessarily is, but I know some people, you know, you can't really read the body language. But for me, I really felt like it was nice to see her expressions so close up, and get a read on her that way. It is a different way to think about it and look at it, but that was helpful to me. All right, so Shannon has an example of now a 7-year-old boy, 7-year-old girl.
Yeah, it's more pause. This is during rapport, and I ask her about, you know, to tell me about something she doesn't like, and I think it wasn't that long of a pause. Again, it felt like forever, and again, I know it, you know, having the Crimson's interview that you guys just saw up close, there are things that I like about that, but then if you look at my interview, my kid's a little squirmy, and turns out that she's coloring, and then she turns sideways, and so it's really hard, you know. I feel like that's all the other stuff that I look at during an interview, so it's hard to not have that visual information during a tele-FI. Just something to keep in mind, you know, and to anticipate before you start doing, you know, the interviews. So, all right, ready, Sammy Jo?
Ready? Give me 1 sec.
Also, I think you get to see how squirmy and
All right, here we go.
So, Sylvia, you told me about some things that you like to do. Tell me about something that you don't like to do.
Well, at school, I like to read books, but I don't like. At home, I like to read books and stuff, but at school, I don't really like to do reading. It's not. I like the books that our teacher reads, but I don't like filling out the paperwork. It's kind of hard and it's boring.
Okay. Again, you can just see that after this long pause, she gave this great response. I really didn't think I was going to get anything, and I was kind of wondering during the pause what was going on that I couldn't see, you know, because I wanted to be able to compensate for that and sort of redirect her, but I didn't know if she was distracted or if she was bored, or if because she kept looking down, was there something happening at her feet? So, yeah.
Great.
If it's okay, I might just quick add that in the lab setting, we had a lot of children that were close to the computer, and sometimes their heads would be down. And I agree that from my perspective, I didn't really know what was going on. And in some ways, I had to kind of trust more that pause wasn't going to cause problems. But most of the times, this isn't, you know, all children kind of, some are different, but for the most part, I found that the children stayed on track, or I could get them back on track with words. And so I think you're right. In kind of what you're describing was also what I saw in the lab setting with the kids.
And let me just jump in. I think in the practice interviews, it was fine, but, you know, doing a forensic interview, if a child was very upset, you know, or their affect really changed, you know, and because of what they were talking about, I think that I would sort of feel helpless that I'm not right there, and it would, you know, what am I going to do now to really assess how they're doing?
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's kind of what I kept thinking about as I watched the clips.
Mm-hmm.
during the interview, it was just uncomfortable. But, you know, when I went back and watched them, that's just what I was, you know, what would I do if is kind of what kept popping in my head. So.
Okay, so I see a couple questions I just wanted to answer. One is about the MDT. Actually, Cassandra, do you want to share how the MDT observed this particular interview? There are numerous ways to do this. Through Zoom, you can have a team member actually join the Zoom call and be hidden and observe the Zoom platform. But Cassandra, what did you guys do that?
So we decided that the detective and the CPS worker decided that they were fine observing just the video of the child in the room and me on the monitor. So they weren't added to the Zoom call, but they wanted a better sense of what the child's demeanor was during the interview. So how we would usually record an interview, they were able to observe that recording from a separate room via television.
So, and then as a result of a TFI, like Cassandra did in this setting, we had 3 recordings that were produced for this Tele-FI. One of the recordings was of the Zoom session itself. Another was of the forensic interview room through our iRecord system, the room that the child was in. And then the third recording was the iRecord recording of the room that Cassandra was in. So, but again, there are different ways to set this up. Nicole mentioned you could audio record the 2 ends of the conversation or one end. If you only have one recording room at your CAC, I would definitely recommend putting the child and the monitor in the recording room that you have, and then put the interviewer in a separate room with an audio recorder to make sure you're capturing all ends continuously recorded for this.
There was one question from Kim. Which recorded version are we handing over to MDT? I wanted to say we were uploading the Zoom recording to Vidanix, or are we uploading all of them?
We're giving all 3 to our state's attorneys, just so they have that as, you know, whichever one they need. But we don't burn DVDs anymore. We do use a system called Vidanix, which I'm happy to talk about. I know Vidanix is becoming more well-known, but it is a secure web-based cloud storage for forensic interviews. Sorry about that.
There you go.
Okay, so here we go. Let me share my screen again. So for kids who, some of you, you know, I don't know if anyone is going to be considering this, but, you know, as this pandemic continues, we may have kids who need emergent interviews who, you know, aren't going to be coming into our CAC environments. There's lots of things to consider when embarking on a TFI in the home environment. You know, you really have to be sure that this is a extra familial case where there's a supportive caregiver. Obviously, the family has to have reliable internet and devices to make this happen. Preferable to have, you know, an investigator. You know, gosh, we got to think creative here. If they can't safely go in the house, maybe standing by. And, you know, making sure that the child is old enough. I mean, we've provided some younger kid examples here to show that this may be possible with younger children, and Jason and Nicole's research was on 4 to 8-year-old children. But obviously more can go wrong. in a setting like the child's home. There are other settings that we have explored in terms of TFI, and that is, some of our acute cases, the children are being seen in the ER. So we have set up a TFI webcam and such in a private room at our ER. Obviously, we don't really want kids going to the ER right now due to exposure, but some of them are going for acute medical exams anyway. So to reduce their exposure to yet another setting, such as the CAC, to do that from the ER is also a possibility. So we would not recommend, and this is based on NCA's recommendations as well, is that, commercial sexual exploitation cases are really not recommended for teleforensic interviewing. They're very difficult cases. There's added shame. The issue of forensic evidence in these cases make it very complicated to successfully conduct an interview. Obviously, kids with severe mental health issues and any kids who are suicidal. The other issue is that, for kids who have experienced violence, digital violence, sexual abuse imagery, using more technology in these types of interviews could potentially be very difficult for them and triggering. So that's another piece that makes it less recommended for those types of cases. So I'm gonna open this up to questions here in just a minute. I do want to show you guys, we have a website dedicated to teleforensic interviewing. It is www.bcaci.org/FIT resources, and I will put that in the chat here. Sammy Jo, could you add that to the chat? I'm going to share the screen.
Can you repeat what you need me to add?
It is, yep, www.bcaci.org/FIT resources. So one of the resources that we're going to share is the teleforensic interview survey. Can you guys see the survey? Do I need to share my screen again? Let's see. I mentioned this survey at the beginning, but if you are doing teleforensic interviews, it's really helpful for us to be able to, there's no research aside from the little bit that Jason and Nicole have done, which we're really grateful for. But, this field studies have not been done, and this is really uncharted territory. So the more that we can inform each other of how this process is going, the better. Again, it doesn't constitute research here, but we're hoping these results can really inform our training efforts. So it's much appreciated if any of you are willing. There's no identifying information really here, very basic, but we would be able to understand a little bit more about how this process is going for you all. All right, so I'm gonna keep this website up if I can. Hold on. But Sammy Jo, if you want to pull up any of the questions that you think we haven't addressed yet, we can spend the last 10 minutes discussing those.
Just got one question. Are you doing this with the child as FI at the end of interview or later? I'm guessing Christina means the survey.
So the survey is for the interviewer to complete after the teleforensic interview is done. But one piece of it is that we want to have the child provide their response to the teleforensic interview process, because that's something we really want to know and document. So is there a way to have MDT members view the interview live? So in Cassandra's interview, the team members were sitting in our observation room and viewing the interview live as usual. Those of you who have iRecord setups or other recording systems, you could certainly have your MDT members sit in an observation room and observe the interview. And obviously, if they are linked from their home to the Zoom call, they would be able to view the interview live that way as well.
I believe other jurisdictions doing TFIs have also had MDT members log into the Zoom call. Of course, muting and changing their name on the Zoom and then turning off their cameras. I mean, I think that would be MDT specific if you felt comfortable with that. Another question, sorry, go ahead, Crimson.
Oh, I was just going to mention that, there have been concerns about using Zoom lately, some articles posted, and we've explored using other platforms such as WebEx, but really the concern there is that any platform we're using, we have to be really cautious about having all the security settings put in place. If you have specific questions about how to set up Zoom in the most secure way possible, Zoom has a great page to describe this. We're happy to help you out. As you can see, we have set up a TFI hotline. We're answering calls Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You'll get a live person, can talk you through that, but there are ways to have this Zoom conversation secured.
Additionally, someone had asked in the Q&A about other platforms, since they're not allowed to use Zoom. We were looking into WebEx, but we haven't looked into that very closely. And then Nicole also recommended Bluestream Health, which is a telehealth platform that is more secure. It does not have recording capabilities, but Nicole said that they have used, I guess, a third-party screen recording. Is that right, Nicole?
Yeah, and obviously we don't have the same concerns around data. I mean, we have concerns around data, but this is different. So you'd want to make sure that your screen capture software is following all of the requirements that you need. But you can have a separate screen capture software that essentially does what Zoom has built in terms of recording. So that's another option if you find that you have a platform that works, but it doesn't have a recording option. And I thought of telehealth first because they often have kind of these built-in security measures.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. My understanding is, and somebody, I think there's some FBI interviewers on here, or those from federal agencies, that Zoom is not being used for security issues there, and that WebEx is permissible. We have a little bit of experience with WebEx. The experience we have is that the sound quality isn't as good as Zoom. So, that could potentially be an issue, but I also hear that others have used it successfully as well. But again, I caution you with any platform with WebEx too. If you Google WebEx, there's definitely information out there about WebEx being compromised in different ways. So we really, really have to make sure we take all security precautions as possible in this digital realm.
Another question, how do you suggest presenting evidence in a TFI?
Yeah, so I did have one slide on that. It was scarce because, we really don't have a good way of doing this at this point. The suggestion I had made is that if there's PPE available, and, obviously the TFI setup is to reduce the contact between yourself and the child for both of you, for both the safety of both interviewer and child. And that perhaps with PPE, you could show the evidence to the child, take a break from the screens, go into the same room with the child and present that briefly, and then leave the room to continue the conversation. Again, that's not going to work in a situation where you're not in the same facility as the child, but I don't have any other great suggestions at this point.
Another question for CACs that are DSS and DSS based and unable to prioritize or triage FIs. How can we keep interviewers and children safe? People are still getting nervous about face-to-face contact.
So what's the question, that they cannot do TFI setups? Was that?
It looks like they're having one family at CAC at a time, conducting interviews, children face-to-face, all others by phone or video platform. So yes, face-to-face with for.
I mean, I'm not an expert on precautions around coronavirus, but PPE is definitely important for everyone's safety. I mean, there's so many people that are asymptomatic. I think you should take all precautions you can. If you can't do a TFI, try to do as much as you can over the phone or remotely, and that stuff that you have to do in person. Hopefully you have access to PPE to do it safely in person, again, and as briefly as possible with as much distance as possible.
Has there been any pushback from our state's attorney or DAs?
Mm-hmm. So far, our entire MDT has been pretty supportive of this process. Our prosecutor viewed the interview we showed you today and, really said it was good. She had only seen one view of the recording and she was watching the iRecord setting. She hadn't seen the Zoom recording yet. So, the Zoom recording will be helpful when she sees that, but no, we haven't had any complaints. They've been very supportive of the process.
And has there been any discussion about how this would work with children with developmental delays or on the autism spectrum?
Yes, it's complicated. I think case by case, you really have to consider what a child's capabilities are based on whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, or other diagnoses that they may have. I don't have a great solution for that other than I would recommend, if you do attempt a TFI, that it be in a room where the child would not have access to turn off the computer per se or touch any buttons, that everything's out of reach for that child. But 4-year-olds aren't that great at sitting still either, and they have been able to participate and are engaged for a certain period of time by the screen. So there may be a child who's ADHD, but they respond really well to screens and communication in that way. So I think it's worth trying in a lot of cases and have a backup plan if it doesn't work. But obviously it's good in a pre-interview to talk to the caregiver who has knowledge of the child and how they think they might do in that scenario.
Prim, can I jump in for 1 second? Because
Sure.
This just made me think about something that we were talking about at one of our MDT calls, where there was no formal forensic interview done, but they were able to determine that the child went to the ER and gave a statement, and so they were able to use that statement. And I guess I'm just saying, this is a time with the COVID-19 and to think outside the box of how we can get what statements can we use. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That if we can't do if a formal FI cannot be conducted because the child's delayed, or the child is autism spectrum disorder, that we might be able to get statements other places.
Absolutely, and we've definitely had some cases that we decided to put on hold based on the fact that the minimal facts interview with the officer on body-worn camera was sufficient at that time. We will go back and do a forensic interview in a lot of these cases once it's safe to do so. But in the meantime, that, according to our prosecutors here, and obviously you have to check with yours and your jurisdictions, but they were able to go forward.